I saw her for the first time in the library in the section of fiction, and she was giving some young sisters a lesson on diction. She said, enunciate, pronunciate, hold your heads high when you speak. I peered through the books in the section of fiction to watch this older woman teach.
I am Amber Holland, and I am the legacy of my grandmother, Hazel I. Jackson.
My name is Dr. Shelby Cunningham. I was born and raised here in Lancaster, Pennsylvania.
My name's Karen Dixon. I was a student in the school system of Lancaster. And as a child, I grew up in a white neighborhood with some blacks. And I attended school at the Rygert School first.
My name is Reverend Edward Bailey, and when I speak today, I speak on behalf of and as the pastor of Bethel African Methodist Episcopal Church, a 202-year-old continuous congregation in the city of Lancaster. It is our mutually and abundantly clear mindset that Miss Hazel I. Jackson should be the person that the formerly named Hand Middle School should be renamed. Miss Hazel I. Jackson was born in Seneca, South Carolina, a state where there was a continued resistance to the Constitution, the number one port of entry for the enslaved African, well beyond the 1808 law prohibiting such practice. Miss Hazel I. Jackson, born in this state, received her education in the separate, segregated, and unequal school system of South Carolina. Yet in spite of all that, and against all odds, against the school that she attended, she not only raised above the limitations that were imposed by the culture of South Carolina, but refused to accept them and became a respected teacher and leader in the community she was raised.
As a young girl growing up in Seneca, South Carolina, she was unsure about her life's journey until one day her teacher was scolding another student in her class and said, "Why can't you be more like Hazel? She's going to make something of herself." But it was at that exact moment that her teacher sparked a light in her, turning on a passion to achieve greatness in her life.
Hazel I. Jackson, as so many African Americans, looked to the North to be the promised land, a place where there was no lynching, no segregation, and absolutely, in their mind, no racism. Educated and with experience in teaching because of her race, Hazel Jackson was forbidden, or at best, not given the chance or the opportunity to teach in the Lancaster School District.
Growing up in the segregated South under separate but equal laws, she was a part of a community full of Black doctors and lawyers, educators and pharmacists, people who looked like her to look up to. She graduated from South Carolina State University with a degree in English and taught in the South for 4 years before moving up north with her new husband.
Because she was a woman of faith, she not only believed that God would make a way, but someday he would open the door. Until then, she would spend her time using her teaching skills in the Bethel African Methodist Church, developing essay contests for elementary and high school students, composing and producing and directing plays, not only for the local congregation, but for the denomination as well.
She thought coming up north would provide her with more opportunities, but quickly learned that wasn't the case. Grandmother would call the school district to inquire about openings and would meet the requirements, but back then, you were required to send in a photo with your resume. Once they found out she was Black, they let her know the position had already been filled. After being told no on multiple occasions, Grandmother finally got fed up and decided every Friday she would sit in at the superintendent's office and wait until she would get her big break. It would take her 9 years until she was able to get back into the classroom and teach. During 1961 in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, Grandmother broke barriers and became the first African American woman to teach in Lancaster City schools. Grandmother walked the halls at Hand Middle School and helped to change the face of the school district. As a lover of Black literature and the arts, Grandmother formed the first Black History Club celebration in the city schools, creating the Black History Club, which is still going strong today at J.P. McCaskey High School.
Another thing that Ms. Jackson has been pivotal in is what she taught me relevant to cultural curriculum in the local branch. We are presently right now on a journey in making sure that our students throughout the county of Lancaster is getting African American studies infused in the district so that they can learn about the African American heritage and history.
And in 1970, grandmother knocked down another color barrier by becoming the first African American professor at Millersville University, a state institution of higher education located in Lancaster County. At Millersville University, she was an English professor and helped to create their African American literature curriculum.
Hi, I'm Gary Smith. I'm one of the original founding members of Theater The Seventh Sister in Lancaster. I served as its producing co-artistic director for 30 years. I really support naming the school after Hazel Jackson. She was an extraordinary woman and an extraordinary help to us. The focus of the theater primarily was to promote community dialogue, awareness, and hopefully positive evolution. First couple of years just establishing ourselves, we quickly became aware that there was an entire canon of African American theater literature that we as theater professionals didn't really know much about. So we decided we needed to do, at the time, we unwittingly called it the Minority Voices Project of the American Stage. That changed as we became more aware and involved with the community, much thanks to Hazel. And eventually it became the African Grove Project.
While I've always known Mrs. Jackson all of my life, it wasn't until I was a student at Millersville that I really got to know her and spend any significant amount of time with her and interact with her, and that was because I was a student. Mrs. Jackson was my first teacher of color. Even though I was a school district of Lancaster product, I had never had any teacher of color in all my years of schooling.
Over 30 years of teaching, grandmother finally retired from Millersville University, and at her retirement celebration, the university awarded her with a scholarship and lecture series in her name. Hazel I. Jackson shaped me into who I am today because of her perseverance, spirit of faith, and love to educate her community. I am grateful to have grown up with my shero and be able to call her grandmother.
Finally, when the school district doors were open with God's help, she was hired to teach in the school district of Lancaster. Never being bitter, she brought her skills and love of education for children and others to the school district. She inspired them to work in the area and field of education. She inspired them to go beyond the restrictions and limitations that was placed upon them. She inspired not only Black children, but other children to not let any restrictions imposed or otherwise to limit them or stop them from being who God created them to be. She challenged young people and older persons to not only reach for the stars, but to jump over every obstacle.
And in those schools, as a Black child, you were considered second in everything. And I always thought that way about myself. I encountered another episode with race that involved a teacher in that school who absolutely showed that she did not like Black kids. She separated the class. She put the Blacks on one side, she put the whites on another side. And we thought, why is she doing that to us? But when I got to Edward Hand, we were able to be involved in everything that the school afforded, girls and boys. And one day, when I was just going to my classes, I had a whole list of classes, you know, you went to, that's when you started going to one class to the other, you didn't have the same teacher. And we were going down the hall to English class. And this pretty Black lady was standing at the door. We couldn't believe it. Hey, she's Black. Oh my goodness, we have a Black teacher. And Miss Jackson stood at that door and she welcomed everybody in the class. She stood there with a smile on her face and welcomed everybody in the class. And so we went in, we'd sit down, and she was the kindest woman that you ever did meet. We never had a teacher that was Black, number one, and who treated us nice, and who was interested in us.
Because of her, not only was she a blessing to the students who looked like her, but other persons and other students as well. The students who looked like her and other students who looked to her as a hero picked up their burdens and moved as she did.
Well, I think the first time I ever met Hazel, I didn't know who she was at the time, but here was this woman that presented herself a way that was, she was dressed to the nines, and spoke very eloquently and precisely, which then later when you find out that, she taught English and she presented herself in a way that at the time, I think, was sort of this fierce warrior. She was the first one.
So that in itself, I thought was a great thing. And I landed in her class because classes at that time were selected for us as freshmen. However, in subsequent years, I was able to pick which classes I wanted. And so that's how she and I got to know one another. And even if her roster was full, it didn't matter. She always accepted us. She was always very kind to us. She was always very professional, and she was always a snazzy dresser.
I mean, Hazel Jackson was so polite, so nice, so confident, and she was a great Lancastrian.
Even while teaching, she was one who expected excellence, and she seemed like she wanted a little bit more from us, the ones that she knew in class. We always appreciated her pushing us to go that extra mile and to give more. But we were also very thankful that she was our advisor, but also that she was looking out for us. That's at least the way we felt. She was always looking out for us.
I passed across a lot those days, whether it was Crispus Attucks at all the events they had, or the Martin Luther King Scholarship Committee. They have an annual dinner, and Hazel would be always attending those. And of course, during her years on the Planning Commission from, I believe, 1977 to 87, 10 years, most of which from the time I was mayor in 1980, she was the chair of the Planning Commission. I'm not 100% sure of this, but I believe she could very well have been the first African American chair, certainly female chair of the City Planning Commission.
I think Edward Hand School should be named after Mrs. Jackson, not just because she was the first Black person or Black woman to become a teacher at Edward Hand, but because she influenced a lot of lives.
Even though she no longer is in the land of the living, we think her name and legacy will still inspire those in the community to reach beyond all limitations and be all they can be. What great statement can be made than to rename the school that was named after a slaveholder, to rename it of a person who her ancestors were enslaved, and she rose above all the limitation and expectation of those who believed that persons of her color were less than a person or human. She became a hero in our community.
A few years have gone by since then, and now I'm a man. And I finally returned to that library with my own daughter in hand. Together, we stood in the section of fiction. Were my ears deceiving me? No. I heard a lesson on diction. She said, enunciate, pronunciate, hold your heads high when you're speaking. I peered through the books in the section of fiction to see just who it was that was teaching. It was the youngest of Serendipity's girls. You see, the elders had kept them together. And I see now that through her girls, Serendipity lives forever.
I never met Frederick Douglass or Sojourner Truth, James Weldon Johnson or Langston Hughes. I never met Shirley Chisholm or Josephine Baker or Lena Horne or Maya Angelou. But I knew and was known by Miss Hazel I. Jackson. And because of that, I got to know these others and their contributions, and my life is better for it.